G'day guys, and welcome to Up to Speed with ElasticSearch. My name is Jason. For the last 2 years I've been running ElasticSearch in production, and I'm currently preparing to take the Elastic Certified Engineer exam. I think that sometimes the easiest way to remember something is to try to teach it, so here we are. Also, hopefully some of you guys out there can benefit from consuming this course as much as I hope to benefit from creating it. Speaking of the quote-unquote course, I just wanted to go over, I suppose, some assumed knowledge or things that I won't be explaining as we cover them. Firstly, I think that it would be helpful if you had some exposure to relational databases, just because sometimes I'm going to compare and contrast how things work in Elasticsearch and how they typically work in a relational database, just because, at least in my experience, that's where most of us have already studied databases, either at uni or earlier in our careers. So I will make a comparison between Elastic and a relational database from time to time. It's fine if you've never used a relational database, but some of those comparisons maybe you won't benefit from as well as if you had. Also, some exposure to web programming in general I think would be beneficial, just because the way in which we interact with Elasticsearch is using web programming methodologies, things like making HTTP requests and using JSON. So onto the course, again, quote-unquote course itself. I'm planning to cover 10 chapters. I may introduce more as we get through these, but at this stage I'm planning to do 10. The first chapter, which is this video, is an introduction to Elasticsearch and setting up. So by the end of this video, you're going to have Elasticsearch running on your machine, and you're going to have some data loaded in it. In the next video, we're going to look at indexes, which I don't want to talk too much about in this video. Let's save that for the next video, but you can imagine them being kind of like tables in a relational database. See, we've already started. In the video after that, we're going to start with search. So we're going to look at how to search the data that you have in Elasticsearch. That's actually quite a large topic, so I'm expecting that to go for 2 videos. Then we'll look at mutations, so updating and deleting records either individually or in batch. There is a really cool feature of Elasticsearch called ingest pipelines, which we'll look at after that. Various sorts of templates, index lifecycle management and data streams, backups, then cross-cluster search and cross-cluster replication. And at this stage, I'm planning to end the series there, but who knows, there may be a secret chapter 11. So without further ado, let's get into it. What is Elasticsearch? Well, if you look at the Elasticsearch homepage or you look at the Wikipedia article for Elasticsearch, I think the definition that they usually use is they say it's a search engine, which I think is certainly a fine definition. And myself in my own workplace will often say that, yeah, Elasticsearch behaves closer to Google than it does a SQL style, where filter. So a search engine is certainly not a bad definition. But if I were asked to define Elasticsearch myself, I'd probably say that it's a document database that's optimized for full text search, which I think is a little bit more expressive. Not surprising since it's longer. But I just wanted to break down those 2 things and make sure that we're all on the same page as to what they mean. So firstly, a document database. If you're coming from a relational background, which, as we've said, I'm kind of assuming that you are, you're kind of used to storing your data in tables which contain rows and columns. So that's, you could say, a tabular database or a relational database. With a document database, your data is stored more like a JSON or an XML document, where the relationships between different things is stored in the same record. So you're not splitting out you're not splitting out things into different tables. So imagine a JSON document or an XML document. You can have child properties, child objects, nested arrays and nested collections and all of that sort of stuff, all in the one document. And that is also true for a document database, which, as you can imagine, makes things quite convenient when you need to retrieve a document from a document database. If it already has child properties and child collections in it, then you don't need to do any joins, which is fantastic. So that's, in a nutshell, the idea behind a document database. Full text search. If you're not familiar with full text search, essentially the idea is instead of doing a SQL style where clause where you're doing something like find all documents where this particular field begins with a certain value or ends with a certain value or contains an exact phrase using the like with percentage mark syntax. Full text search is a bit more powerful. It breaks up a word into multiple parts, and if any of those parts exist in the document, then they'll be returned, and they'll also be ranked in order of relevance. So if you search Google, for example, page 1 will probably contain very relevant results to what you searched for. The contents of those documents will probably match quite closely your original search query. But if you go all the way to page 10, you'll notice that the relevance starts to drop, and you start getting documents that don't quite match what you search for. There may be a very, very partial match to what you originally searched for, but half of what you actually searched for may not appear in the documents on page 10. So you get the really relevant stuff on page 1. By the time you get to page 10, maybe not so relevant. That's hopefully a reasonable explanation of full text search. So ElasticSearch is really good at doing full text search. It can do other types of searches as well, but that's what it's really, really good at. So let's move on. We are using a specific version of ElasticSearch in the course. As you might have imagined, ElasticSearch has been around for a while, so there are multiple versions of it. And I've decided to use version 7.10, which came out in late 2020. And there are kind of two reasons for this choice. The first reason is you are probably not always going to have the luxury of using the latest version of ElasticSearch constantly. Even if you do write an application that's using the latest version of ElasticSearch when you initially build it or when you initially start development, but new versions will come out and you don't always have the luxury to constantly upgrade and constantly be at that current release. So it's probably good to get used to searching the Elastic documentation for a specific older version. As for why we've gone with version 7.10, 7.10 was the version that was used to fork OpenSearch. And I don't really want to get into what OpenSearch is or why you should use OpenSearch over Elasticsearch or vice versa, but 7.10 was the version of Elasticsearch that was used to fork Elastic and create OpenSearch. So as of version 7.10, anything that we cover for that version should be applicable to both Elasticsearch and OpenSearch. So by covering version 7.10, it doesn't really matter which of the two you're intending to use. The content that we cover should be applicable to both. And lucky last, as far as slides go, where do I get it? So I'm going to put all of these links in the description, but if you open the first link, you'll hit the ElasticSearch website for version 7.10, where you can download this for your particular operating system. In addition to ElasticSearch, so ElasticSearch is, you could imagine, like an instance of MySQL Server or some flavor of SQL Server that's running as a background process on your machine. You then typically need some kind of interface that would allow you to talk to that database service. So If you're using MySQL, you might use MySQL Workbench, or if you were using Microsoft SQL Server, you'd have Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. The same is true for Elasticsearch. So what you would typically use to interact with Elasticsearch on your machine is a product called Kibana. Kibana is a visual tool that will let you talk to Elasticsearch, and that's what we're going to be using in the, I don't want to do this every time, but quote unquote course. So similarly, download the appropriate version for your operating system. Make sure that this is the same version as Elasticsearch. If you're using the links, they will be. In addition to Elasticsearch and Kibana, we also want some sample data. So without any data, it's going to be a very dry and theoretical course. So I have prepared some data for you to download and for us to use in the course. The first is, I believe this is Shakespeare collection. Yeah. So we've got a Shakespeare data set as part of this package. That's what we're going to be importing later. As you can see, I haven't prepared this data myself. I've just forked it, but I've forked it so that in case the original repository goes down, the link will still be active. And we have another data set that we want to be using as well. This is for Apache Logs. We're going to use the different data sets for doing different things, but either clone these repositories or just download them, because we're going to want that data as well. So let's get out of the slides and actually set things up. So once you've downloaded all of that stuff, you can create a new terminal window at the Kibana directory and a new terminal window at the Elasticsearch directory. And once you've done that, let me move these over. You can invoke the Elasticsearch executable from the bin directory. So opening up the Elasticsearch folder, inside the bin directory, there's this Elasticsearch executable. Run that in the terminal and give it some time to run. I've already done it just so that we don't have to wait for it to finish processing. And same thing for Kibana. So in the Kibana directory, there's a bin folder and a Kibana executable. Run that in the terminal. You'll want to do the Elasticsearch executable first, because Kibana will try to connect to it. And once that's done, if you scroll to the bottom of the terminal window in the Kibana terminal, you should see that you've got a HTTP server running on a particular port. So that port should be 5601, unless you've modified the configuration. And if we navigate to that URL, localhost 5601, you should see a screen that looks kind of like this. And I want to address firstly what may be an elephant in the room. Some of you may have noticed that if you navigate to that URL, you're able to access this dashboard without logging in. And that's only because when we download Elasticsearch and Kibana, the security features are turned off, presumably for quick development, playing around, experimentation, and so on, which is pretty much what we're doing. So I'm going to leave those turned off just because, again, we don't want to have to keep logging in to do anything, just for the sake of speeding along through the course contents. We're going to leave those security features turned off. Having said that, at the end of the course, perhaps secret chapter 11, we can cover security and how to enable those security features as well. But don't get the wrong idea. Don't think that those security features don't exist. You can create users and roles and logins and so on, as you probably expected. Now, if you look at the what do you call this? The hamburger icon on the top left. There's quite a lot of different screens and different features in Kibana, which I understand might be a little overwhelming, but we are actually only going to use 2. So to get to these areas even quicker, I recommend using the search feature up the top. So the first thing that we want to do here is import some data. As I said, we want to have ElasticSearch up and running with data in it so that we're ready for the next video. So let's go ahead and import some data. What we actually want to search for here is search for machine learning. And I'm sorry if any of you got really excited when you saw that, because I know that machine learning is a really hot topic right now. We're not actually going to do any machine learning. We're just going to use one of the features under that section. So as you might have noticed, we've got this ability to import some data here, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to import the Shakespeare dataset, and we're going to import the Apache Logs dataset for us to use later. So let's hit upload. Let's grab those two files out of your downloads folder. I'm going to start with Apache Logs. Whoops. There we go. Okay. I'm going to import this, and it's asking us to enter an index name. So I don't want to go too deep into indexes. We're going to cover that in the next video, but just imagine this as like a table in a relational database. So since this was Apache Logs, I might call this Apache_logs. And I would actually untick the index pattern here, just because we haven't covered this feature yet. We are going to cover this when we look at templates, which I think might be chapter 6, if I'm not mistaken. So with that unticked, let's go ahead and import that. Cool, okay. So coming back to the data visualizer, let's do the same thing for the Shakespeare dataset. And let's do the same thing. We'll just hit import, untick, create index pattern, and I'm just going to call this Shakespeare. Shakespeare. That's how you spell Shakespeare, right? Yep, awesome. Let's import this. Great. And you may be somewhat comforted if you were overwhelmed by the large number of screens and sections in Kibana earlier to hear that we're actually only going to be using one page or one screen in Kibana moving forward. Now, if you're not super comfortable with a console or a terminal, I'm afraid to say that it is going to be a terminal or a terminal-like screen. So in the search bar, let's hit dev tools, or just type dev and navigate to dev tools. And you should see a screen that looks something like this. So this is how we're going to be interacting with ElasticSearch for the remainder of the course. And this is kind of why I mentioned it might be useful if you have some exposure to web programming. So what we have here is a HTTP verb. This is an endpoint. So if we run get search, this is a JSON payload. The query that we're specifying is a match all query, which will match all documents. So it's kind of like a select star from everything in a relational world. I'm not actually going to run this. There's no harm in running it, but I want to run something else. To start with, let's run get slash. So this is going to be running a get on the root of ElasticSearch, and it's just going to give you some basic information about the ElasticSearch instance running on your machine. So you can see the name of my ElasticSearch instance. We've got the version, which is 7.10. Good. That all looks fine. I might be interested in getting the, say, all of the tables that I have running, and I can do that with a get slash get underscore cap slash aliases, not aliases, sorry, slash indices. And we're going to use a question mark V, which is going to make the output show in verbose mode. So we're going to see basically the headings of the output that we get. So these are all of the indices, or indexes if you prefer, that we currently have. The ones that start with a dot are created by Elasticsearch. We don't really need to worry about those. But we can see that we've got Shakespeare here, and we can see that we've got Apache Logs here. These are the indexes that we imported, indexes that we created earlier. You can see that they are in yellow health at the moment as opposed to green. Don't worry about that too much. We are going to review why that happens towards the end of the course when we look at cluster-related features like cross-cluster search, cross-cluster replication, or we may touch on this when we look at indexes in the next video. But I think I might actually wrap up this video here. By this point, if you've got this screen up and running, then you have Elasticsearch running locally on your machine. You have data in it, and in the next video, we're going to look at indexes in a little bit more depth so that you understand what's actually behind these indexes that we created, and perhaps even why they're showing up in yellow health instead of green. So thanks for following along, and I'll see you in the next video where we look at indexes. Bye.